Hey guys, how you doing? This is Bobby Davis here in the tech capital world, Kernersville, North Carolina. It's another beautiful day here. I'm joined by my producer, Kevin Doyle. Say hello to the world, Kevin.
Hey world, how you doing?
Doing good.
I'm great. I'm good. It is a nice weather day today.
Yeah.
We'll start this talking about the weather, and we always have nice weather. So generally,
we do. North Carolina's underrated for weather, I think.
North Carolina is. See, when I moved down here, so I moved down here from Ohio. I've been there for 10 or 15 years, and when we moved down here, I was like, wow, the weather down here is so much nicer. No wonder so many people migrate south this way.
Yeah.
I think the mountains stop a lot of the terrible weather from coming. So it's like it's just constantly nice.
Yeah. So we'll get a snowy year. You know, it's cool sometimes, but most
but not a real snow.
Spring and summer, man, like 70, 80. It's
we don't get real snow. We're not quite California like 70s all the time, but it snows every so often. So let's say hey to a few guys that we have here that are joining us again today. MSV's here.
What's up,
MSV? Thank you for being here. Thank you for contributing to the Discord channel. Thank you for putting all those memes out there. I appreciate it. We're going to show a few of those in a little bit. Those are super good. So thank you for putting in the time. We appreciate your time here. Glenn's here too. Hey, Glenn. Glenn has a question too, which we'll talk about here.
We might get to it. Yeah,
we might get to that one. We'll try. Let's see. Adam's here too. What's Adam saying here? Talking about a boot camp. John B's here. Maverick's here again. Maverick, thank you for contributing to the Discord channel. We appreciate it. We love the memes. We're gonna put a couple of yours up today too, I think. Devansh is here. Hey, Devansh. Beth is here. Hey, Beth, welcome back. Doug's here. Oh, Doug's enrolled in the July bootcamp. Cool.
Yeah, Douglas. All right, congrats for getting in. Awesome. So if you guys want to come into the bootcamp, we do have a open house next Tuesday.
We do. We have an open house next Tuesday. Yeah. If you go to coderfoundry.com, banner at the top of the site, you can click on there and you can register for our virtual open house. So to let you know, it is a sales pitch. We're not going to talk about being a developer. Essentially, we're going to talk about what we offer at the school.
Yep, pretty much.
So you know.
Yeah.
Nathaniel's here. What's MSV doing here? Oh, Candy. I like Candy.
Candy.
I know, and that's like I told you this, didn't I? We were literally a minute late, and I said Adam's going to be on us about being late again.
I know, yeah, we're late.
Sorry, it's just expect us by 5 after. That's the new time we start is 5 after. If we show up before, then we're early. Let's go with that.
It was my fault.
Scheduling it. I'm going to start scheduling it for 12:05.
No,
so you guys can't get on us about it.
Get out at 12:07. Then let's get in 2 minutes after that.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, guess who's here? Look, Nightbot.
He's after somebody, man.
Picking on MSV already for doing something.
I know. I guess he's got those brackets in his name. I'm not sure.
I don't know. I can go and look and see what he did, but it's like I gotta go and look. So
okay.
Raphael's here too. Hey, Raphael. Who else we got here? You, Wilfredo, the whole gang's here. Ryan's here too. Awesome. Thank you all for joining us. We super appreciate it.
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, definitely. So technical problems, like again, right before we start today.
Yeah.
These things, man, I love these things, these AirPod things. They're super good. Yeah, super good until they don't work.
Right.
Yeah. Bluetooth's such a fickle technology. Man, it just like I just want to connect.
So
yeah, you're right, exactly. Yeah, like there you go. I wanted to connect all the time, and they just don't. So I'm headsetless today. I have big cans, but I chose not to put them on. So if there's any feedback, let me know, and I will fix it and put big cans on. But
yeah,
I'm not going to do it if I don't have to.
All right, cool.
Adam says Nightbot hates candy.
Nightbot hates candy. I mean, that's what it was. He didn't like the emojis.
That's probably true. That's probably what it is. So yeah, we haven't changed the background. Somebody mentioned changing the background. So we're not going to change it till the book comes out. We're going to keep rolling with a book theme.
Okay, cool.
We have, you have this book coming out. It's kind of
breaking the code.
Breaking the code. We have a book coming out June. I'm sure you guys all know this. June 23rd. We did throw the website up yesterday. 5 steps to a softwarejob.com. So you can go there. And you can check out the website. And I'll actually let me see. I actually have it as a bumper here too. So you can go there. You can check out the site. We launched that. The book comes out June 23rd. So we're going to ask you to, if you're going to buy it for 99 cents on June 23rd. It helps us.
Yeah. or paperback, either way. If you want to come to the virtual book launch, it's down there. There's a form there too, is where you can fill out and attend the virtual book launch. We can't guarantee that you'll get in it. We do have a limited seating that we can with Zoom and stuff. So like, but go ahead and register now if you want to. I know that several already have. So.
Yep. And we're using Zoom webinar, so we are limited. There's a you can host 10,000 people on a Zoom webinar. 10,000 people is the maximum. You know how much that costs you? $6,500.
So we're not doing the 10,000
for a month. So we're not doing 10,000. Enough to say, kind of crazy. It ramps up.
If 10,000 came to it, that would be kind of crazy. But
if
like,
10,000, you guys,
we have to worry about that on Tuesday night at 7. 10,000 people.
If we can get like a quarter of our subscribers on YouTube to sign up, that'll reach out 10,000. We're close to that. So that'll
awesome.
But that ain't gonna happen. So we'll see.
All right, so check it out if you can. So,
yes, definitely. That would be very cool. Thank you very much.
We get to see my mom and dad. So yeah,
gonna be good. That's how crazy it's gonna get.
Yeah, exactly. Bringing the parents.
So what are we talking about today?
Today we've got a developer here with us today. And so Shawn Wildermuth, and he is kind of a really deep technical developer. He's a Pluralsight author, speaker, and all around MVP for Microsoft. So he's a really good dude. I think he's going to show some stuff today, demo some code.
Awesome.
So we're gonna get technical today with Shawn. So
I like it. So let's bring Shawn
in. Hey Shawn, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you guys doing today?
We're doing pretty good. So
I was just checking out the book website. That looks great, except for how uncomfortable you look in the picture.
Yeah, so we've got some better pictures. So
well, that's the thing. Like getting photos taken, it's never
It's never. No. I have some headshots I had taken, and I look like I'm just ready to go to the bathroom. It's just awful. It's just the worst.
So, a lot of people, they saw the picture and they said, "You're wearing a jacket. What is that about?" So
I think a lot of comments here were like, "Are you becoming a lawyer?"
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I passed the bar. So.
That's funny.
So, Shawn, tell us a little bit about you. What's your origin story? How did you get into being a developer?
Well, I do. I have a weird sort of story. So my when I was 16, my mother went out on a date, and which is not how most stories start. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
This is how most developers start out.
Yeah.
And this was a long time ago. I'm pretty old. And so this was before like that there was the internet and all that. So she actually answered a personal ad in the newspaper. This is how some people met back in the day. Let me explain. A newspaper. No. So she went out in the state and it didn't go terribly well. But she spent her whole time telling this guy about her son, who was obsessed with his Commodore in his room and was staying up at night and skipping school during the day to do stuff on this old Commodore.
Before you go on, what kind of Commodore?
I had a VIC-20 and then a Commodore 64.
Okay, wow. I had a C64 was my first machine.
Yeah.
I had a TI-99. That's what I had.
Wow, with that awful those bubble keys, like not even a real keyboard.
I just remember using the tape recorder to save my code.
Yeah, tape recorder on the CD4 too.
If
you had the floppy drive, you were like you were legit if you had the floppy.
You mean rich?
Yeah. There you go, rich.
Yeah. Because I begged and begged my grandmother for the computer, and it arrived, and it didn't have any way to save programs.
Yep.
I'd leave it on for days at a time until we got
Sorry to interrupt your story.
No, not at all. And so he reached out, I think, in an attempt for a second date, and told her that I should come visit him because he might have like a summer job for me. And I went into this office, this frankly little dingy office, and he told me what he wanted to do, and I was really confused because he wanted me to basically create a forms over data app, and I didn't even couldn't even conceive what a database was. But I started a job there, and I stayed there for 2 years, and eventually made the really good decision of dropping out of high school, and then later I dropped out of college, which I think is the best path to software development.
Most of the great ones dropped out of college. So
yeah. I like to say I steal I'm trying to remember. Not going to be able to bring his name all of a sudden. But a famous comedian used to say, I finished college in 15 months. They called it dropping out, but I was clearly finished. And that's kind of my story. And so I've been working since I was 16 in software development for the most part. I just got really lucky to, run into an early job writing CPM, and then eventually Paradox and DBase, and then Clipper, and then Visual Basic, and on and on and on. This year will be my 36th year. Yeah, something like that.
Okay, cool.
Got my first job in 86, so that math doesn't work out.
Okay.
39 years or 34 years? 34 years.
Okay.
And it's been a long ride. We grew up pretty poor, and so I don't know that without that sort of luck. In fact, I got my Commodore 64 when I was 13 because I had a wreck at a go-kart track and got a settlement.
Oh wow! Okay,
that's the only way I ever upgraded to a 64.
Okay.
Again, I think that's a typical story. Most people used a legal settlement to start their computer career, but and so I got into the Microsoft space probably in the VB1 age, and I actually paid cash for a copy of Axios 1.0.
Wow.
Yeah. So and so I've been kind of in that space, the whole time.
So you're old enough to remember. What did you call Visual InterDev? We called it Visual Notepad. Did you have a pet name for it?
I didn't, because I was doing mostly C++ back then.
Okay.
So luckily I didn't have to do that. I was using Hot Metal, if you remember Hot Metal as an editor, and I also used trying to remember the other one after Hot Metal. There's a really cool one, but I can't even think of the name of it. I think I still have the box.
Wow.
That would be impressive.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it, but Home Site.
Okay.
Yeah. So I got into the web a little later than some people was, because I had been doing so much Comm and C++ for a long time.
Right.
I remember I had a friend who taught computer science at Georgia State here in Atlanta, and we were having coffee like we often did, just sitting out at this little coffee shop, and he was telling me about this new internet thing, and I was just like,
yeah.
What? There's no way. I mean, you'll have it at colleges, but there's no way people can have it in their houses. What would they do with it?
Exactly.
Right.
Dial-up is fine.
Yeah, exactly.
My Prodigy account is fine. I don't know why I can't say that word. Though like CompuServe was the only, like without the community on CompuServe, I don't know that I've ever completed any project back then.
Right. Exactly.
That was so crucial to everything I did.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the foretelling of, Stack Overflow or something like that.
Exactly. So, I used to, you can tell how old someone is if they can remember their CompuServe number.
Yeah.
I've long since lost mine.
Yeah, I definitely don't remember mine. I don't remember my AOL name either.
I don't either.
But we all had one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are you doing right now? What kind of stuff are you working on now? Like, what are you doing currently?
I teach more than anything.
Okay.
So to stay sharp with the code, I do a lot of work with some nonprofits, help them out with different things. And
that's awesome.
we actually, one of the things I help here in Atlanta is the Atlanta Code Camp that we had to cancel for the first time in 10 years because of all this. So that was kind of sad. And I'm very sort of anchored in Microsoft and the web space. So I've been doing ASP.NET Core since Preview 2, and that's kind of where I sit. Is I do Angular and Vue, ASP.NET Core on the back end for the most part. I'm working on a microservices course right now, and we'll see how that works out. And so, I keep busy in the development world by helping build out websites for the most part, and try to see how I can then apply that into courseware. I spend most of my time creating Pluralsight courses, and I also have a small set of courses that I sell directly out of Wildermuth, which is the name of my company, .com.
All right, cool. We'll have to get that URL, Kevin.
Yeah, definitely. Sure. If you can grab that, Adam, that'd be great, and put that in chat. That'd be sweet.
So it looks like you already have a fan here. Maverick said he saw your video on ASP.NET Core versus VF Code. So.
Yeah, that was a fun course, though terribly out of date right now, to be perfectly honest with you. That's one of those that Pluralsight has me update a lot of my courses, but they kind of have to be popular enough to go ahead and make them as popular as possible.
And MSD said, Shawn Waterman, please reopen your Bootstrap course for free for a few days. Hey, we got to make a living here, MSV.
When COVID started back on the middle of May, I made all my personal courses free for 2.5 months. And so he must have been in the middle of it on June 1st when it reverted back to not free.
Right.
Just so he knows, you can still buy it.
Exactly.
It is still for sale.
You can still finish it up. So how do you decide what technologies to teach then? How do you make a decision of that? Is it something that you feel like is going to be popular, or something that you use, or what's your decision there?
It's a little of both. I have to feel comfortable using it before I'll teach it. So that's pretty crucial. So I'm not necessarily always chasing the most popular thing. And sometimes I'll hitch my wagon to something that isn't popular. Like I was kind of known for a few years there as someone who did a lot of Silverlight. And I sort of fell into Silverlight accidentally because I had been contracted to create a course for Microsoft. And then suddenly I was the only one who had ever created a course for Silverlight. When I taught it, it didn't have the name Silverlight. So
oh, wow.
Yeah. Though I should have known, because all the example code they gave me used AG for the Silverlight object.
Funny.
This is back in the Silverlight over JavaScript time. And so I sort of accidentally fell into that. And there's other times when I picked a technology like Oslo, if anyone remembers Oslo. Object spaces I was really big into, WinFS. So I've made some pretty bad bets as well. I feel like it's
Bobby knows the Silverlight story very well.
So don't feel bad about the Silverlight. I remember watching Tech Ed when that guy came out on stage and said, "Oh, by the way, Silverlight's dead." Like matter of factly, we're moving on to HTML5. And I can remember getting calls from customers like the next day, because it was all over the internet. Like the internet explodes and Silverlight's dead, and then they had to come out and retract it. Well, it's not really dead. We're, it was, So and it went away with quickness, and so you end up pushing out rewrites. So it was one of those things that I kind of felt like it wasn't ever going to be as big as people wanted to be, because the day that Jobs said that plugins would never happen on the iPhone, I was like, oh, okay. It's just not going to happen. Yeah.
This is going to have a shelf life. But, I honestly rode that horse as long as I could, because I like developing in XAML, and, of course, I love C#. I've been doing that for, 19 years or however long it's been around now. And so I certainly don't regret any of the time I had in Silverlight, but it's one of those things that plugins were a great idea until they were an awful idea.
Exactly. They were cool until they weren't. That's kind of the way a lot of stuff is in our world. It's great until it's not.
Yeah.
So what's so you want to show us some stuff today? What would you like to show us today? I think it's something really cool. Tell us a little bit about it.
So I spend a lot of time in Angular and in Vue. Mm-hmm. I'm not really in love with React, which I'm sure will get people to start hanging up on the show right now.
Right, yeah, exactly.
But it's more of a personal opinion about how React works. It's not certainly isn't a condemnation of the platform. I mean, it's huge. If I was going to chase the popular, I would be doing React and React and React.
Right, yeah.
So I got into Vue because I needed something smaller than Angular. And, one of the things that Angular at least didn't do at the time, and they're certainly trying to get back to that, is to be able to do like a bunch of small projects. Because one of the sort of soapbox I live by, or I live on, is this idea of a single page applications make me crazy. I kind of fought when the acronym came around we shouldn't be calling that. We're just encouraging people to create one monolithic application,
right?
Or as I call it, VB for the web, right?
Right.
It's the it becomes this, we're encouraging them to take over all the navigation of the website, and no matter what it is, they're just going to go to one URL and go about their day. And so with this idea that I sort of push of multiple islands of functionality is the way I like to think about it, that you're going to have a website, it has different pages, and then you're going to have these rich islands of functionality that give great user feedback within a page. And it might have navigation in the page. Like if you think about the way shopping carts work, that might be one fairly large browser application. But you may have the catalog as another, sort of singular application. And Angular didn't really have good build tools to do that sort of thing. And so I started to look into Vue because I wanted something that I could handle. Like I didn't want to create an entire large application for my contact page, or I certainly didn't want to create the whole website using Angular just so I could have good validation on a contact page. And that's kind of where I came into Vue. Vue has the ability, for those who haven't touched it, to have a build cycle, to do all sorts of interesting things like Angular and React by having a build cycle, but they're not required. And that was sort of the thing that really excited me. I even wrote an article for Code Magazine probably 6 months ago now about Vue is also a great way to sort of get rid of your jQuery code, because it's just code. It becomes something a little more testable than how fragile jQuery can be. Right. So what I'm going to show you today, let me go ahead and share my screen. Yeah, there's a lot of tips. Entire screen.
There we go. Now I'll be able to pull it up here. There we go. Sorry. There we go.
So I'm in Visual Studio, and hopefully it'll be big enough for you guys to see. And I just have a little web app here, has no client-side functionality yet. And I'm just going to run it real quick so we can see it in the browser, so we can see changes as I make them. And if you go clockwise, everything speeds up. I don't know if you guys know that.
That's it, man. I learned something new today.
Yeah, exactly.
Just don't go counterclockwise. That will
hold on. If it's on a Mac, is it counterclockwise?
Well, Mac just use the touch screen.
Okay.
Yeah. That's my favorite joke. So if we go back to Visual Studio, we can see that I just have a simple view here that just has some server-side pretty simple code to just write out some of this data, right? And so I'm going to add to this page view, and like the old days, all I really need to do is bring the view CS in. So I'm going to bring in the view.min, and I have a little section here. If you haven't done ASP.NET before, this is just a way to sort of inject things onto the master page. And so there's a little section for scripts, everything inside of this little block, and being injected at the bottom of the page. And let me fix this since these are obviously going to be /. Visual Studio doesn't handle the node modules thing as well as I'd like it to yet.
So I actually know nothing about Vue in terms of how to use it. Is it always you have to host Vue, or is there like a CDN for Vue?
There's CDNs for Vue.
Okay.
There's also a whole CLI for Vue where you can create a new application and it builds out just the files you need as well. So
cool.
That's one of the things I like is you can sort of start small, and once you hit
keep it real small
level, you can then move on to something larger where you get the benefit of using things like TypeScript and a build cycle and validation and linters and all of that other thing. But at the beginning, it really is drop vue.min there, and then let's go ahead and just create a little JavaScript here, and I'll call it JS index.js. So I could be using TypeScript. There's a new version of Vue coming out that's a little more TypeScript friendly than Vue 2, which is the version I'm using here. But you can still use TypeScript with 2 as well. It's just takes a little bit more hand wringing. So I'll do my regular, make sure I know what file I'm in. And all we're going to do is say new Vue object. And inside of this Vue object is just a JavaScript object that's going to help configure it. And then we do something called mount. And mount says, where do you want me to start paying attention to what's on the screen? And so the way we do this is I'm just going to create a quick div here. That we can go ahead and do stuff in. And I'll just give it the app, because I'm very creative about my ID names. And then this is just a CSS selector. So it's just pound the app. And so I'm saying I'm going to have a new object here. And this is going to have some data associated with it. And that's also an object. So I'll have my name here and just say Shawn, right? So I have the code has some data associated that I want to bind to the page and then be able to write code against that. And so let's do that. So in this case, all I have to do is just use a syntax, a double curly brace, which a lot of the languages use. And then I have access as sort of the root object, that data object. So I can just say name, right? And we're not doing anything all that interesting yet, but we can see if we go back and refresh the page, go clockwise again because it's rebuilding for some reason. That it didn't work, right?
Okay.
This is exactly what I wanted to happen. Let's find out why it didn't work.
You want to show us debugging is what you want.
These guys love seeing debugging. Whenever we live code, we debug more than we live code.
One comment from one obvious thing that you should know about Vue is you also need to bring in the code you wrote. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's just, I've been doing this for 34 years. That's a suggestion all developers, I think, can benefit from. So actually have the code you wrote execute. You do not have to recompile every time. What are you doing? Woohoo, Shawn, right? So who cares, right? I could certainly redo this whole idea here in code, but let's see how much time. Oh, we have plenty of time. Let me do the long version of this. So let's go back to the index.js and let's create the rooms. And I could do this as just an empty collection for now, right, that we want to bind to. And then I can just create another, these are sort of wired events, and one is called mounted. Mounted simply says, when this view is put upon the page, run some code for me. And so one of the ideas behind Vue that I really like is they know what they want to be responsible for and not responsible for. So Vue actually doesn't have a networking stack because they're like, we could create our own, but there's already great networking stacks out there, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can choose, even using Jquery would be fine, but we're actually going to go ahead and add Axios, which is a popular one that a lot of people are using, even though for some reason they've never had a 1.0 release. I don't know what happens on the web, but they're used in so many giant projects, and I guess 19.2 is as late as they really want. And just like old school development, once you get it here, let me refresh this because it's notorious for not refreshing quickly. We can do the same thing. Oh, where'd you go? Or I can just write it in the browser. See why it hasn't installed. Usually Visual Studio is good about grabbing all the packages, but not always. There we go. Right. And so I'll just grab Axios and put it also on the page. Again, nothing magically special here. We're just using web development tools that we might use in other places as well. Axios is just a really simple way to make network calls. So let's do that in our code here, now that we have it on the page. And again, for those of you that are already using ES6 and stuff, we could also do imports and such. But in this simple example, we're using ECMAScript 5 because that's what the browsers we know can use. But once you move to the builds, you can go ahead and use this. So we'll go ahead and say axios.get. And the server already has a controller here to get data on the rooms. And it's just called API rooms for no good reason, except it's nice and obvious.
And so that, just for the audience, that API is just something you wrote in C#, like a web
in
API.
C#, yeah. Right. It's part of web API. And
right.
So then we can say then, because this returns a promise. And because I'm running in a later version of Firefox, I'm going to go ahead and use an arrow function, which, oops, I already did that. So we can get at the result and just say this. So one of the things it does is it sort of hijacks the this pointer in 2. 3 is a little different, but in 2, to expose this data element here. So that in my code here, I could just say rooms equals result dot data. The data is the payload of the result here. It also gives you other information like 200, and I could check for errors and all that other sort of thing. And so if I've done this right, over in the markup, I can simply create a div, and I'll just put the room name here for now. And then I'll show you how we're going to change a little more. But I'll just say r.title here, because the title of the room is the name we see. And I'm going to use a syntax here that just says v dash, which is how all the view attributes work, and there's a for. And for simply is going to say for r in rooms, right? So rooms is that data element, and I'm creating a temporary variable for each of those rooms. And so this whole element will be duplicated for each room that I get out of the server. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if I haven't screwed it up, let's see what happens. Woohoo, right?
Oh.
So going to the server and getting those. And so let's change this. And let's go from server side, which I'll comment out. Then I'm just going to do the client side instead. So instead of this title, I'm going to use that same markup I did. Right? It's the same idea, but I'm just going to change these ats to use the new syntax. So it's going to be R, and of course it's camel cased. So it's going to be title, R description. One of the reasons I like this strategy is the markup we're dealing with is really the same, and that writing the code in the way we're used to ends up being the same, where we can have it edited in a pretty simple way, but we're really allowing us to move stuff from clients from server to client when we want to.
Right.
That by separating them, I can write tests against all the things that this does without having to manipulate a shadow virtual DOM in my tests like I would with jQuery, right? You end up running jQuery tests that are much more, what's the word I'm looking for, that are much more integration tests than they are actually unit tests.
So I've got a question from the audience. I think
Sure.
it's relevant to what we're doing. He's talking about his Razor objects. I think he's talking about the model coming in on it. And I think you've answered that, but if you want to address that real quick.
He basically says, could you add Razor objects from the model into view data?
You could. It's just not preferable.
Right. You don't want to.
Yeah. I mean, you could create a little script block that had all the data inline, but creating an API is going to be lighter and easier to test.
Right. So I guess the approach here is if you're adopting Vue as your front end, you're basically replacing Razor, and you're going to write your back end in some kind of web API or endpoint technology.
In a lot of ways, though, you're still going to have Razor because there's benefit in having things like the master page being Razor, and there's also some benefit for creating views that are bound on the server side as well. So you might imagine that if I was creating a form where I wanted all the countries filled, instead of forcing Vue or even any of the other technologies to fill out that list of countries through another API, you might just fill that out as a bunch of options in a select when you create your view initially.
Right.
So there's benefits of sort of doing of a hybrid approach in some cases, because one of the things you're getting out of the browser generation of views is caching, and you don't get that as much out of using Web API sometimes.
Okay, cool.
So binding for me is about data that changes. So I wanted to stop on the source before I changed it, because what we're doing here in Razor is injecting it into an attribute. And every other place I've done this is really changing the body of some element. And so there's an attribute syntax that says vbind. But you can actually just shorten that to just a colon. So when you want to bind to an attribute, you just add a colon in front of it, and it says, oh, okay, so this is everything inside of this is now just view syntax, right? I'm going to go ahead and get the first image and show it here. And so we end up with a not very terse version of this. The size of this is pretty much the same size as we had before, right? There's not a bunch of other magical elements in this. And for me, that's a big win, right? We could even take this V4 rooms and put it on that top element to even make it so we don't have any extra divs in here. Let me see if I have given us enough divs. That's always the question, right? If we come back here and refresh, go clockwise again, because I don't know why Visual Studio keeps on rebuilding.
Yeah, so it stacked it. Okay.
Well, it stacked it because I don't know. Oh, it stacked it because of the name. Yeah. Let's put another row in here. It's stacking it because with the name in there, everything is shifted to the right, and then it doesn't fit in the container.
Right.
At least I'm hoping that's why. One of those. I think it's, there we go. That's more of a bootstrap thing than having anything to do with Vue, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah.
And so one of the benefits here is because we're running the code closer, we can then come down here to the button and go ahead and just add a click event. And there's a v-on where I can just say on click event or any event in the DOM, really, I want you to run some code. And what is this code going to be? And let's just call this book, right? And in fact, I'm going to pass in the object that I'm binding to. So instead of having to go look up at the data and look at the index and all this other weird stuff you do, I can just go ahead and pass the same object that's in this for each. Where the for each go? In this for each, so that what I end up doing back here in the code behind is I'm going to create a section called methods, and this is where you create all the non-event sort of methods that you have. And I'll say book, I'll call this the room, and I'll write, some very complicated logic like alert room.title, right? Just so we know that we're actually getting the object. But what we're seeing here is that we're actually, we're getting access to the actual objects that are on the page. Right? Here's the varsity. There's the Omni. And so we can do smarter code in this code behind, because we're not, none of this code looks like it knows anything about how it's bound, right? And that's to me sort of the benefit of creating client-side code that is really testable, because I could test if I pass in a room, what happens when I pass a room in, and those sorts of things.
Right.
And so let's talk about events real quick, and then we can go ahead back and talk about your book more. Just a little joke. And so I'm going to create a div, and I'm just going to create a quick button here. I'll call add new. And I'm going to go ahead and color the button because I just can't stand to not have a styled button. And so just like I did Vion click here, I could do the same thing here, right? There's actually a short syntax for Vion, which is @, but of course we're in a razor page. So I actually have to do 2 ats in order to do it. But I'm going to leave it as Vion. But there is a shortcut for Vion that you'll see a lot, which is just the @ symbol, which to me I kind of like, is what at the click event, run this code, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
And in this case, I'm not going to send it any parameters because I don't have any context. I just want to run some code. I want to add a new room. And so let's do that. Let's add another one. What did I call it? Add new, hopefully. Sure. Add new. And then what am I going to do? This pointer of this function ends up being, again, that access to that data element. So I can just say add rooms.push. And then what am I going to push? Title, a new room. I'm going to need all of these things, which I usually copy and paste from everything else. So let's just make sure there's an image. That's the one that will really screw everything up if we don't have the right shape. I'll do the great trick of copy image location. No one tell me to do that, right? And so this is one of the places where I find the other benefit of binding, right? If you're in a space where you think about binding, I should be able to just add to the room collection, and the page just react to that. And that to me is a huge win for what we're doing here. Is again, this code is all very testable about what it does, right? I can run add new. I can see that the number of rooms has been added. I can see that the whole thing is working. And it allows me to write code that isn't so indelibly tied like we tend to see with JavaScript. Now, the benefit to me is over some of the other frameworks like React and Angular, is that all this code is really centralized, right? We have one JS file. We have a couple of scripts that we brought in from CDNs or locally installed or however you want to get at them, and then you can just write code. And once this list of scripts gets to be 6 or 7, I'll go ahead and just load up the CLI. And let me show you sort of out of the oven version. Let's see. I showed a longer version of this talk for the Sheffield group last week. Cool. And that's the version one, not the Sheffield one. So sorry. Oh, I closed the entire Visual Studio. Okay. Everyone can see all the projects. Uh-oh. I forgot to put an after for you. Misagua. I think that's where I did it. Yeah. So this is a version where we have an example that's a little longer, where I've then created a version with the CLI. And what we can see here is that I've used the CLI to create a client folder that has a more ES6, ES2000, sorry, 2020 version that is more similar to what you would do in React Review, where you actually have a build. And so here, the Vue CLI actually has commands for building and such, but I've put them as NPM scripts. So I'll say run watch. So I didn't call it run watch. Oh, I did. That is weird.
And so this script is doing what for you? What is that for somebody who has out there?
It's essentially taking all the code that's inside of this source folder and building it into just 2 scripts that you can use.
Right. Okay.
And it's very weird that it's not building.
And so if you wanted to separate like your scripts out just for...
Well, the idea here is that as you get larger, you gain the benefit of an actual build cycle. So that during the build, it can validate that that you aren't violating things by using linters, that you're not using initialized variables, or that all the code works together, or everything you've referenced is spelled correctly. So the way that the more complicated way of Vue works is that we essentially have some imports, and we can see some of the same code. I'm still mounting, except that I'm mounting from by building components. And so you can build a component that then contains other components. And that's effectively what we've done. One of the other is something called single page components, single file components, I'm sorry, not page. And so this app.vue file is one of these. And this is where the template is specified, and the script, and even CSS in the same file. And then it's compiled together by the compiler so we can just use it.
Right.
And so it's a little hard to explain all this, but we can see that this component uses this component. And so if we want to get into a larger application, we want it to be composed of different components that we're using and reusing, Vue can handle that as well. So we can go all the way from the version of the example we saw a minute ago of just basically a simple replacement for something like jQuery to a very complicated multi-page routing, centralized view management, and all of those things we're used to in modern SPA development. We can also do that in Vue. Okay. It's just a matter of sort of scaling up from there. That, to me, is the huge benefit. The benefit here really comes down to what's the word I'm looking for? Being able to start small, get started, validate your ideas, and then if you need to then scale up. Whereas with React and Angular, you have to start with a big tool chain and a build cycle.
Yeah, it's the whole. You have to buy the whole thing.
You have to buy the whole thing, and so that's one of the things I really love about this. And I don't think Vue is a replacement for either one of them. Really, where I think it sits is in between them. So Angular is really good at building the monolithic enterprise sort of application. I think that's where it sits in most cases. And then you have React on the other side of it for building very component-based applications, using JSX and the other things that sit there in React. And it has its place when you're building more widgety sort of applications. I'd like to say that I think React makes sense because it came out of Facebook, because Facebook isn't an application. It's 100 little panes that are their own applications. And so it does that really well, right? It makes sense if you've ever been to facebook.com. You're like, oh, yeah, none of these things necessarily are one giant application. They all sort of just interact with each other. So I feel like Vue has this very good space in between, and has a great community behind it. The other difference between it and Angular and Vue is there isn't a big corporate company behind it, and that's a plus and a minus. There's a good group, a community group that develops and maintains it, and it's been around for several years now. I don't know what the number is, but that is a risk to some corporations. They're like, but what if, they get a job or get hit by a bus? That's certainly something to consider if you want to trust that Google or Facebook has your best interest in mind. You may want to stick with those.
And so for the other audience out there, how do you feel that ASP.NET and what's going on in the .NET world and Vue, how does that all work together?
Vue doesn't care how it's hosted. So whether you're doing Node or whether you're doing JSP or whether you're doing ASP.NET, it's just building JavaScript files that are going to be hosted on a website. So Microsoft doesn't really have anything magical about Vue. They've tried to sort of get their hooks into making it easier to build Angular and React apps by having templates, and there aren't templates for Vue, so if that's a consideration. But I think for most of these technologies, I prefer to keep them out of the backside anyway. That's just sort of my inclination of, I think most developers, I would like to be a little bit more comfortable with the command line to go ahead and run builds or keep them in the background.
Right.
Because if you look at the way a lot of this stuff works, I'll have a background task that, if this actually worked, where I could just say npm run watch. Oh, it's working on this one. What we'll see is that it builds and then it builds these files. And because we're saying watch, if I went and changed one of these files, it would rebuild it. And so there isn't even a build cycle. I just change code, go to the browser, change code, go to the browser, and I get that cycle instead of necessarily needing to develop. So it does mean, like most client-side development, that I'm not debugging in Visual Studio. So it also means that if you're on a Mac and are using Visual Studio for Mac, or you're using VS Code anywhere, that the experience is the same, right? That I'm not necessarily reliant on what editor I'm using. Because I'm a kind of a 50-50 guy. I spend 50% of my time in code and 50% in full Visual Studio.
Right.
I think Visual Studio is still better for C# and code is still better for JavaScript and TypeScript. So
that's exactly how I do it. I have my both open right now. So
yeah, we've talked about that.
Yeah, so like it's so weird. I don't know why I do it. I just do. But like I was fixing a problem today, and that it's just a Bootstrap problem. And so I just pulled out the HTML and the Bootstrap I was looking at and stuck it in the code so I could work with it.
Yeah.
And the project was in Visual Studio. It's like I could have monkeyed around with it in Visual Studio, but I just wanted to like pull it out. I don't know why I do that, but I just do. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. It being a thinner code editor, sometimes it just does a better job with some of the just text editing part of it. Exactly. You know what I mean?
Just CSS, JavaScript, and HTML. It just seems to be better.
And it's enough IntelliSense. The Visual Studio team recently released sort of an AI-powered IntelliSense, and it does some interesting things, but it slowed me down too much, and I was like, and I had to turn it off. I was like, would you stop helping me and just let me type?
Just let me type, man.
I just want to type. That's all I want. It's the most important thing. I will have a link out on my website at wildermuth.com to this demo after our talk. I'll do a little wrap-up post and link.
Awesome. Okay, that's cool.
Link to the video as well as to the code, so you'll be able to get the working version of the code.
Awesome, great. And Adam put those in chat too, so if you guys need those, you go check out Shawn's blog at wildermuth.com. And he also put the Pluralsight link in chat too, so you guys can go check that out as well. And I'll add them to the description of the video too once we've finished recording here as
Appreciate it. And you can also go to wilderminds.com, which is my company, WILDMINDS.com. And that's where you can see the trainings and other things I do.
Okay, cool.
Awesome.
I mean, if you're in North Carolina, you should take their training. But otherwise, while you're in COVID, you should take
No, there's enough training to go around.
There's enough training to go around, man. That's why we brought you in. So, like, yeah, I mean, so So I'm going to put a couple of questions here. I think we've already addressed this a little bit, but Fury Papa said React and Vue have the same capabilities? Question mark, question mark.
They have similar, but they approach them in very different ways. So React, in many ways, I wonder if Furry Papa is related to John.
I don't know.
Or he's incognito. Once you catch me in a lie. Vue takes the idea of components in a bit different way. Vue has this idea of JSX where you can sort of combine the markup into the code. And it's one of the reasons I tend to not use React. I'm sorry, I may have said Vue instead. React has this idea of JSX that you sort of are building your component templates directly in JavaScript or TypeScript. And that's one of the reasons I don't use it is it's been so ingrained in my head to separate markup or UI from the code that it just makes me a little crazy. Doesn't mean it's wrong, doesn't mean it's bad. It's my comfort level, and it just makes me feel a little icky, to be perfectly honest with you.
Right. Okay.
I'm not trying to talk anyone out of it. It's just day to day, I don't enjoy it.
Right. Okay. That's fair. That's completely fair. I feel kind of the same way. See if there's anything else on here. Any other questions? If y'all want to ask any questions, now's the time. We're running out of time here.
We are. Well, you went late, so
yeah, it's
20 minutes late, right?
That's about how it goes. It's just Adam calling us out. So,
so what part of Ohio did you grow up in, Kevin? Because
I didn't grow up in Ohio. I just spent. Yeah, I'm originally from the UK, but I spent 10 odd years in Ohio, in Columbus.
Oh, well, you sound like most people. You sound like most people I know from Columbus.
Yeah, like I said, this is not a Columbus accent.
So I think APIs are critically important. One of my more popular courses on Pluralsight is actually how to design an API. It doesn't actually show you the back end at all. It's just like when surfacing an API, thinking about the actual design of it so that users can use it. So we talk about designing payloads, URIs, even designing the versioning of versioning of the API. Because I feel like that's the glue between you and other parts of your organization, between you and actual customers, between you and your development community. And so designing them to be future-proof and to be obvious, and that you shouldn't have to go read the docs every time, that they should be somewhat self-describing or at least intuitive. And so, yes, I think we're gathering in a world where client-side plus APIs is a big part of what we do.
I think that's the movement, definitely, when you see all these libraries. That's kind of where it is. So how does microservices fit into that? And
Sure. Microservices, which let me be clear about microservices. They add a complexity that many applications don't need.
Right.
Just to be really, like a lot of applications need clients, server, database, and they can go about their business. But in cases where you get into the level of complexity, APIs become the glue between the services. And the API doesn't necessarily mean REST. I talk about a lot this idea of sort of polyglot APIs, to where REST out to the web makes a lot of sense. REST to apps makes a little bit of sense. But we also have these other techniques like SignalR, like gRPC, like message queues, like all these other ways of communicating and collaborating with partners, that now when we get into writing microservices, we're going to use the same method. Like if I need to have an email sent because someone just purchased a product, I don't need a web API to do that. I probably need a queue because there's no reason for that call to feel synchronous in my application. And inside the data center, I might use gRPC because it has strong contracts. And I can have strong contracts between my pieces. Though going out to the web or partners, those strong contracts could get in the way. So I might want to use REST in those cases.
Okay.
But in all those cases, you're still designing API services. Just the technology over which you share them are different.
Okay. Here's an interesting question. This kind of goes along with what we're talking about. Does C# MVC have a future?
Does MVC have a future? Yes.
Yes.
I really do think so. Well, C# on the server has a definite future. Let me say that because MVC was really brought in to solve some problems that were introduced in web forms, and Razor pages were brought in to solve some of the problems of MVC. And so ASP.NET has a future, and that future might be part Razor, part API building, and part Razor pages as well. And even to some cases, there might be some benefits to using Blazor, which is going to be sort of in that same stack.
Right.
So server side C# through ASP.NET, I think, has a long future. It's like saying, well, we can write client side. Does Node have a future anymore?
Right.
I think so.
Yeah, and I think, and Christopher, the other thing I would add is MVC is just a design pattern. So there could be new patterns that come out, but I think C# will still be there.
Yeah.
Regardless of how you architect your app.
I was at a conference, I don't know, may have been 10 years ago now. And I was talking to one of the other speakers about what he does and all of this. And he mentioned that he wrote the MVC paper. And I was like, what do you mean? You know, back in 1972,
right,
when I invented the MVC pattern, and I was like, oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
like the MVC paper.
Yeah. So when I was 3, and I'm old, when I was 3, MVC was invented. So it's the usefulness of it. You're going to see the same sort of idea. In fact, Vue, Angular, React all use the MVC model. They just don't call it that.
Right. Yeah. There's this concept of controllers back there, and
yeah.
So.
Okay, well, these guys definitely enjoyed you being on today. So Chris says thank you. Tech with Estevan says thanks. He loves viewing the stuff you talked about, viewing the framework. So that's super cool, and we appreciate it definitely.
Yeah,
absolutely. I had a great time, and hopefully everyone learned a little bit.
Yeah, well, if you want to, we'll hook up with you after the show here, and we'll see if we can get you coming back again if you want to, if you've got time.
Sure.
I know you're pretty busy.
I'd love to.
Yeah, that'd be very cool.
But yeah, check out Shawn on Pluralsight. Hit his website. He's got some courses out there that you can take. You can learn some things. So he's one of the guys in the industry that's a really good instructor, a really good teacher, and I think you'll learn a lot. So
thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks Shawn.
Appreciate it.
See you guys tomorrow. Super cool.
Yeah, very cool. Let me do one thing before we leave.
Okay.
I know we're a few minutes after, but we have one last thing. I'm gonna.
So we got
because there were so many overnight between a couple of you guys posting these things. Like there was a lot. So I was like, we picked a few. We looked through these first this morning.
Right.
I was like, so I'm going to share the ones that we actually like here. So here we go. This one was good.
So read it for me.
This was don't travel, don't socialize, stay inside, coronavirus lockdown rules, normal people all upset about it, and Tom
programmers
about it.
Yes.
Programmers. It's almost like what's new.
Yeah, exactly. What's new? That stay inside all day anyway. I mean, like really?
Anyway, exactly.
I've been door dashing for weeks now. So yeah.
Exactly. There's another one. This was good. The Galaxy Fold comes out. The 2 screens. I'll have to start sweating.
Yeah, what are we gonna do with those extra screens? I mean, yeah, I know. I think Xamarin's gonna have support for it, but like,
it's gonna be interesting because stuff like this, when we do see these like screen changes, when it is like this, you have like maybe multiple screens or do different things on different screens. It's like, what do you do?
Imagine the first few apps will just use one side.
Probably.
So it'd be left or right or something like that.
It'll be just like when iPhones changed like their when they came out and they changed their screen resolutions, and it was like the Apple put in that like 2 times zoom thing.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll run on half a screen or something. That's what'll happen. The existing apps will be there. I like this one. I picked this one.
This app isn't working.
The business is the app isn't working, and then the smug developer over there works fine on my machine.
Yeah, exactly. He has no intention of trying to fix it. It worked on my machine. I don't know what happened.
I like that one.
Something broke in the build. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And you picked this last one. You like this one.
Yeah. This is true. This is what I think. What gives people power? Feelings of power, money, status, programmers using the terminal in front of non-programmers. That's it, man. There's nothing more intimidating than see someone rock out Git on their command line, you know?
When you have no idea what's going on.
What are you doing, man? What are you bashing? What is that? So
So there you go. So that was our meme picks for today. Thank you.
Thanks a lot
to you guys for submitting those. I think I don't know who did those, but they were between MSV and Maverick. I don't know which ones of you guys submitted which ones, but I think I chose some or both.
I appreciate it.
That's fine down those. So yes, we definitely appreciate it. Please keep submitting more in there. We think it's super cool and it's fun. So
all right.
I think that's all we have.
Guys. Keep coding. We'll see you tomorrow.
We'll see you guys tomorrow.